will you tell the listening / viewing audience who you are and what you do?
I am Erin Lowry, author of the now 3-part Broke Millennial series, and I like to call myself a financial translator. I think it's the most accurate description for what I try to do. Personal finance expert also gets, bandied about, but really my goal is just to help make very complicated financial conversations a bit more easy to digest. And then my most recent book is Broke Millennial Talks Money, which is all about how to actually have these incredibly awkward conversations.
So the awkwardness seems to be a running theme. Why do people not want to talk about money?
Oh, I wish there was just this super short, succinct answer for why. It's a multitude of reasons. Some of it is cultural. Some of it has to do with society. Some of it has to do with like our own innate feelings of whether it's guilt or shame, whether it's because you feel like you don't have enough or you have too much, or you were told at some point in your life that this is inappropriate and rude and we shouldn't talk about it. There's just myriad reasons why we feel this way. None of them are wrong. Everything is justified for why you might feel uncomfortable. But I personally am of the belief that at the end of the day, it's all about judgment. That is what we're afraid of. Mm-hmm. So whether it is being really honest with a friend about the fact that you have credit card debt, or being open with a partner about the fact that you have student loans, or talking about the kind of lifestyle that you want to live and feeling judged, we are so much less likely to have that conversation with a dear friend or a sibling or a romantic partner than a stranger on an airplane. All right. I've had so many in-depth financial conversations with total strangers because they're like, I'll never see this girl again. It doesn't matter. Where my friends, it's a mixed bag. Like some are very, very honest. Some were honest and then got married and then got a little less forthcoming because now somebody else's financial life is part of the equation. And it's a lot about boundary setting and finding what feels good to you. But fundamentally, judgment would be the most succinct answer to that question.
I asked on TikTok for people's best questions about money or most pressing questions about money. So one person asked, how do you navigate different class backgrounds in a relationship? I know you just did this whole book about like relationships and stuff. I'm in it. How do, someone on TikTok wanted to know, how do you navigate different class backgrounds in a romantic relationship?
First, there is no solution. And I don't,
yeah.
And I am not trying to say that as a flippant thing. I'm in that dynamic. My husband and I come from very different socioeconomic backgrounds. We grew up very differently. How our families talk about and relate to money is very different. And there's a term that gets used in the book by Dr. Bradley Clontz, who was on, I think, episode 1 or 2 of Bad with Money. And he brought up this term perpetual problem when I was interviewing him for the book. And I think that coming from different socioeconomic classes often is an underlying perpetual problem in a relationship. It doesn't mean that it is forever going to cause angst. It doesn't mean that there is no solution to ways that it, what would I say about it? There are ways to work through it, but there will always be times where you two have fundamentally different reactions to a situation. What is funny to me is just because one comes from a lower end of the socioeconomic ladder does not mean that they are less likely to want to spend. I would argue that some of the times when somebody comes from the wealthier background, they're the one that can get very about boundaries, defensive about how to spend money, very particular about how money gets spent, because that could have been the messaging that was passed down from them from their parents. We get to blame all of this on our parents.
It's so true. Yeah. Often it is the person who comes from money who is a little bit more cautious. And then, because you would think it would be the opposite. And then it's the person who doesn't come from money who's like, well, fuck it. Money, we lose money and gain money all the time. What does it matter?
A big part of that does need to be about the two of you communicating to each other what your baseline needs and wants are. You can also have a conversation about how the two of you handle money as a couple, especially if you get married and there's like a legal commingling of assets in a particular way, where it might be that you need to either stay totally separate, or maybe it's that, and what we do, we kind of do the hybrid model. We do joint banking for a lot of our like bills and investments and savings, but we each have separate accounts for our spending money, because it reduces a lot of nitpicking at each other about how money is being spent. Mm-hmm. And when you have this kind of underlying perpetual problem around stuff like that, then the one who is a bit more fixated on saving can just save the money, and the one who wants to spend can spend the money, and it's within an amount that feels comfortable in your relationship dynamic, feels comfortable for the goals that you've set together. I personally advocate for some level of autonomy in a relationship. Like, just because two of you have gone together, you're not like an amorphous blob that have just like become one entity. You're allowed to be two separate beings who have very different emotional reactions to money. Yeah. And that is a big part of working through money conversations, is acknowledging your emotional triggers around it and sharing that with your partner.
I was going to say, yeah, how do you keep from, in these conversations, how do you keep it from getting so emotional? I feel like go in super prepared with what you want to say and like have a set time, so it's not just a random fight at 2 a.m. How do you go into that without it being like, it requires so much vulnerability, at least in my experience?
Oh, I think vulnerability is the key part of this, which you hope, if you're in a committed relationship dynamic, that you are okay with a certain level of vulnerability, but that can take work.
And there's so much resentment I've heard from people, you know, I pay for everything. I pay for even like when we go to dates and coffee and whatever. And like, it just starts to build resentment. And then the other person could get offended by the resentment. It's like such a mess.
It is. And I also, one of the other lines that I love from the book is the idea of equal isn't always fair. Mm-hmm. And that is really important when we're talking about socioeconomic differences, whether it's what you came from or whether it is where you stand currently in terms of income. Mm-hmm. Because the idea, for instance, of splitting things 50-50, we've kind of been conditioned to believe like, well, that's fair, 50-50. Well, it's not if one person is making $250,000 and one person is making $60,000. Mm-hmm. That is not fair. Or when you think about family support, because that is also where some of these conversations can really get tense, is if one person's parents or siblings don't need to be financially supported and the other person do, one might then start to be like, well, it's not fair that we have to keep doing this. Again, fair isn't always equal. Equal isn't always fair. However you kind of want to think about it in your head, part of being in a relationship with somebody to a degree is also committing to their family dynamics and their family. Now, of course, there can be times where their family member is abusing that relationship and you have to set boundaries. But you also have to be very honest and open with your partner about what does it look like as we grow, as we have our own financial goals, as our life changes, and supporting a parent. And you have to figure out for yourself, if you're the person whose family member is not being supported, you need to figure out how to release any type of resentment you might feel about supporting a family member who needs it. And part of that might need to be acknowledging systemic issues that's led to your family being able to be in the position they're in and their family not. Part of it could just be having a very honest conversation with your partner. You might need to bring in a counselor. You might need to see a therapist separately. Like, there's so many different ways to handle this. Mm-hmm. You have to figure out what works for you, and you have to figure out how to release any resentment around a decision that is getting made, so that every month, if you're writing the check, it's not like this, like, you gotta just let it go.
The thing is that it's never just money. Then it becomes like emotional triggers and vulnerability and embarrassment. And it's just like, it's like this like inanimate, ubiquitous thing. And then it's never just that, is what I've found.
Money, I feel like, it's just a way we've managed to quantify a realm of our lives that then is just tied to like every type of trauma we've ever experienced, every emotional relationship we've ever had. It's also not just your family, obviously. It could be friends that are hitting your buttons, partners that are hitting your triggers. Mm-hmm. You also might not know what your triggers are. Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of this. When you're in a partnership dynamic, you need to do the self-reflection to figure out, what is it about money that I have an unhealthy, toxic relationship with? Money is literally my profession. Right. I definitely need a financial therapist. Like, I
cry all the time.
Yeah. I am constantly in a state of stress and anxiety about money, because my money script is very much about like money vigilance in a way, or like I like to have it. I want to hoard it. I want to build it. I'm afraid that it's all going to go away.
I just looked at my accounts and I was like, oh, I'm like, oh, it's a little bit less than I would want. And then my brain immediately said, well, it's a little bit less than you want. And you know what? You're going to get cancer tomorrow. And you're going to regret that you don't have that extra $1,000 you want because you're a dumb bitch who's going to get cancer, which like doesn't even connect. You should have saved that extra $1,000 and now you deserve to be sick. Like what? Like it's so twisted and wrong and like it's just in there.
And it can fluctuate to such extremes too, where I have both versions of this where I will feel at times like, how do we not have more? How have I not invested in a way that has built more? I have been working in this field for so long, and also because everybody and their mother posts these net worth updates, and I just feel like, what am I doing wrong? And I work in this industry. Yeah. My sister got me a piece of art that's in my office that I see above my desk that says like, stop comparing yourself to people on the internet. I feel that way. We all do. Everyone has, even experts have complicated relationships to money. Mm-hmm. And I think it is so important for all of us to also be honest about that fact, that there are a lot of relationship dynamics that I am very comfortable navigating that the average person might not be, because literally wrote the book on it.
Right.
But my own personal emotional relationship with things, I still go back and forth all the time.
Yeah, it doesn't have to make sense. It's just intrusive thoughts.
Yeah, it's fun, isn't it?
Okay, so someone asked, is it during this time, is it better to like live with your parents and sort of be, if you can, and sort of be a little bit like give up autonomy or give up sacrifice things in order to save for the future? Or this person was worried about like, should I move back in with my parents? Should I do all of these things that I see as backward steps in order to like get money, for the future?
Yeah. So I want to unpack two different parts of that. First of all, let's try to separate the like morality play that all too often comes up in personal finance. And by that, I mean this idea of some level of like, debt is bad. You have totally done something wrong in your life and screwed up if you've ever amassed any form of debt, or that you're somehow like immoral for doing so. Or one of my personal favorites on a recent clip from I won't name it, news channel that I saw was basically like, it is immoral not to repay a debt, such as like student loan forgiveness cancellation shouldn't exist because it's immoral for you not to repay it. Because every 18-year-old totally understands what they're signing up for when they sign those contracts. That aside, I do think it's really critical to not intertwine those two and bring all the shame into it. I know that's very hard to do. And also not to try to benchmark your life steps against the where you're supposed to be's, which, as I just admitted to, I do as well. We all do it. This pandemic, and I like truly so unprecedented in such a way that we can point to previous recessions and financial fallouts, and there can be some level of personal accountability where like, I mean, you signed for the mortgage that smelled a little funny. Mm-hmm. Or the dot-com bubble burst, like we kind of saw some writing on the wall. Like there are moments where people can at least somewhat point to personal responsibility if they want to bring it in. This, we cannot. You working in entertainment or the hospitality industry and the whole world shutting down for a year, you cannot help that.
You weren't like retail and waitresses will surely not be jobs like that. You just did, that just didn't occur to anyone.
Right. So to think that, hey, if I have a personal safety net that I can turn to in this time, yeah, use it. There's nothing wrong with that. I also really do think one of the ways we all need to reimagine an emergency fund is, in addition to money that we need to be putting aside for an emergency, is also thinking about what is our personal safety net in terms of family that could take us in or loan us money, friends that we could turn to. And that then this ties to point two, that is not a mentally unhealthy place for us to be. That to me is the other big part of this idea of, I get why for some people it feels like a level of regression to move back in, no matter where you are in your life. If you need to turn to a loved one for help, that's okay.
And it's lovely that you have that. I think we've got too individualized in certain cultures where, like, you know, I've talked to, for my book, Bad with Money, I've talked to people from cultures where it's completely multiple generations of a family live together, and that's lovely.
Yeah, and normal. And like, of course you live together. I would also, though, say, depending on your relationship dynamic with whether it's parents, siblings, is this a mentally healthy environment for you to live in? What is your dynamic with your parents or your grandparents or siblings, you know, whomever? I do really feel, especially in a time like this, our mental health does need to be prioritized.
No, it's hard to be like, I think for a lot of people, it's like, it might be worth going into a little debt or having or spending above my means in order to not have to deal with like my dad's verbal abuse or my mom's, like, you know, misunderstanding of my gender or, you know, things like that.
It is hard to also say like, hey, just like amass some debt to.
I know.
And I get both sides of that, but I do think the pandemic, if it's taught us nothing else, is that mental health is really one of the things we need to be most protective of. And without that, so many other elements of our life can start to fall apart. And so really trying to consider ways that you can try to at least risk mitigate. Maybe it's a month. Maybe you're like, mentally, I can handle a month. If I can even just save up money for a month moving in, great. And setting those kind of timelines and boundaries. And if you can, talking to the loved one that you're moving in and trying to set healthy boundaries with them as well. Like, hey, I'm 30. I know I'm moving back home, but we're not going to regress to like 18-year-old me having these kinds of curfews and like, you know, yelling at me about.
We're not going to talk about, like, I'm not going to listen to you give your opinion on my politics. Like, you know, like that's not a thing we're going to discuss while we're here. Would love to talk to you about old films and like reality shows. Would not love to talk about like my sexuality.
Exactly. And I do think it is very fair. I get it, my house, my rules mentality that a lot of parents have, but it is also very fair for you to set your boundaries and to just leave a room or walk out of the house or whatever you need to do to protect yourself as well.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you dropping by to help me promote Bad with Money, the podcast, which will return March 31st. Where can people find stuff about you and your stuff?
Most active on Instagram. So that's at Broke Millennial Blog. Every Wednesday I do an Ask Me Anything. So if you have a pressing question, please come ask or like slide into my DMs. That's fine. But definitely Wednesdays. My website's brokemillennial.com. All 3 of the books are available wherever books are sold. Please shop local. Always want to be plugging that. And if it's not in your budget right now to buy a book, library. And if they don't have it, request it.
There's also a really lovely app called Libby that lets you get books on your phone, and I am a big fan of that. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Also, there's an episode of Bad with Money with Erin on it, so you should look and find that too.